The crocodile hunter's final hunt. The crystal-clear waters of Reef shimmer like liquid glass under the Australian sun. September 4th, 2006. 2:26 p.m. In these pristine waters of the Great Barrier Reef, something ancient and deadly glides silently across the sandy bottom. 8 feet of pure muscle and razor-sharp weaponry. A creature that has survived unchanged for millions of years, armed with a barb that can pierce through bone like a hot knife through butter. Above, a man floats peacefully, his shadow dancing across the reef. He doesn't know it yet, but in the next 30 seconds, this shadow will trigger a defensive response so violent, so catastrophic, that it will end the life of the world's most beloved wildlife warrior. The cameras are rolling. They capture everything. And what they record will haunt everyone who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. Fear grips your heart when you realize that sometimes even the greatest experts can't predict when nature will turn from friend to executioner. This is the story of Steve Irwin's final moments. A man who danced with crocodiles, wrestled with pythons, and kissed venomous snakes, brought down not by a massive predator, but by a creature most people consider harmless. A gentle giant of the sea that, in one explosive moment of terror, would deliver hundreds of strikes with surgical precision, puncturing a heart that beat for wildlife conservation around the world. This is not just the story of how Steve Irwin died. This is the story of how 30 seconds of footage changed everything we thought we knew about the ocean's most misunderstood creatures. The bond between Steve Irwin and the wild began before he could even walk. Born into a family where crocodiles were dinner guests and venomous snakes were household pets, Stephen Robert Irwin learned to speak the language of the wild before he mastered human speech. His father, Bob, wasn't just a wildlife enthusiast, he was a pioneer, moving the family from Melbourne to Queensland to establish what would become one of Australia's most famous wildlife parks. Young Steve's playground wasn't a swing set or sandbox. It was a reptile park where death lurked behind every enclosure, where one wrong move could mean the difference between going home for dinner or becoming dinner. At age 6, Steve received his first python as a birthday gift. While other children were learning to ride bicycles, Steve was learning to read the subtle body language of creatures that could kill him in seconds. His mother, Lynn, would find him asleep in his bed, curled up with pythons and lizards, treating deadly reptiles like most kids treated teddy bears. This wasn't recklessness.
Remember,
this was education.
Observation is key to.
This was love. This was a young boy learning that every creature, no matter how dangerous, deserved respect, understanding, and protection. By age 9, he was wrestling juvenile crocodiles under his father's watchful eye. Bob Irwin didn't just teach his son to capture these ancient predators. He taught him to understand them. Never approach a crocodile with fear, Bob would say. Fear makes you unpredictable, and unpredictable gets you killed. Steve absorbed these lessons like a sponge, developing an almost supernatural ability to read animal behavior. He learned that aggression was usually fear in disguise, that most attacks happened when animals felt cornered or threatened, and that respect was the most powerful weapon in any wildlife encounter. The teenage years brought more responsibility and greater risks. Steve began leading crocodile capture expeditions for the Queensland government, removing problem crocodiles from populated areas. These weren't tourist attractions or photo opportunities. These were life-or-death missions where a single mistake could result in losing an arm, a leg, or his life. But Steve thrived in this environment. He developed techniques that seemed impossible to outside observers. He could predict a crocodile's movement seconds before it happened, position himself in exactly the right spot to avoid those massive jaws, and somehow make wrestling a 1,000-pound killing machine look like a graceful dance. But Steve's true calling went far beyond the adrenaline rush of dangerous encounters. He understood something that many wildlife experts missed.
Not found in books.
Conservation wasn't just about protecting animals in distant reserves. It was about changing hearts and minds. It was about making people fall in love with creatures they feared. When he met Terry Raines, an American naturalist visiting his family's zoo, he found someone who shared not just his passion for wildlife, but his vision for using television to create a global conservation movement. Their courtship happened among crocodiles and venomous snakes. Their wedding photos featured pythons draped around their shoulders, and their
No, not
honeymoon
at
was
all.
spent capturing crocodiles for relocation. The birth of the Crocodile Hunters television series transformed Steve from a local wildlife expert into a global phenomenon. But fame never changed his core mission. Every documentary, every television appearance, every death-defying stunt was designed with one purpose: to show the world that even the most dangerous creatures deserved protection and respect. He would thrust his face inches from a cobra's striking range while explaining the beauty of its defensive mechanisms. He would swim with massive saltwater crocodiles while describing their crucial role in aquatic ecosystems. He made the terrifying seem beautiful, the deadly seem precious. His children, Bindi and Robert, grew up just as he had, surrounded by creatures that most people would run from in terror. Steve was determined to pass on not just his knowledge, but his passion. He wanted them to understand that every creature, from the tiniest spider to the largest crocodile, played a vital role in maintaining the balance of nature. Family dinners included discussions about conservation strategies. Bedtime stories featured real adventures with real animals. Birthday parties happened in the zoo, surrounded by the creatures that had become extended family members. Now, let's meet the creature that would end it all. The short-tailed stingray and Australian bull ray are among the ocean's most misunderstood residents. These magnificent creatures can grow to enormous sizes, with some specimens reaching over 8 feet in width and weighing several hundred pounds. Their bodies are perfectly adapted for life on the ocean floor, with flattened shapes that allow them to glide effortlessly across sandy bottoms and powerful tails, equipped with serrated venomous barbs that can grow up to 15 inches in length. Despite their fearsome appearance and defensive capabilities, stingrays are remarkably gentle creatures. They spend most of their time buried in sand, feeding on small fish, mollusks, and crustaceans. They are not aggressive hunters. They do not seek confrontation. Their venomous barb is purely a defensive weapon, used only when they feel threatened or cornered. In fact, documented cases of stingray attacks on humans are extremely rare, and fatal encounters are almost unheard of. Most injuries occur when swimmers accidentally step on buried rays, causing them to lash out reflexively. But these gentle giants have one critical vulnerability that most people don't understand. Stingrays have evolved sophisticated defensive mechanisms against their primary predators, particularly tiger sharks. When a stingray detects the shadow of what it believes to be a shark approaching from above, its entire body goes into emergency defensive mode. The normally docile creature transforms into a weapon of incredible speed and precision. Its tail can strike with lightning speed, delivering multiple wounds in seconds. The barb doesn't just pierce, it tears, creating jagged wounds that are difficult to heal and prone to severe bleeding. The barb itself is a masterpiece of natural engineering, covered in retrograde serrations that make it incredibly difficult to remove once it penetrates tissue. The venom contains a complex mixture of proteins that cause intense pain, tissue necrosis, and cardiovascular complications. But it's not the venom that makes stingray attacks so dangerous. It's the mechanical trauma. That barb can slice through muscle, puncture organs, and cause massive internal bleeding. In the hands of a panicked 8-foot ray, it becomes a weapon capable of delivering fatal wounds. The warning signs had always been there, but Steve Irwin had danced with death so many times that he'd become comfortable with impossible odds. Throughout his career, Steve had suffered numerous injuries that would have ended most people's wildlife careers. He'd been bitten by venomous snakes, mauled by crocodiles, and attacked by countless other creatures. Each incident taught him something new about animal behavior, about his own limitations, and about the thin line between respect and recklessness. But these experiences also created a dangerous sense of invincibility. Steve had survived so many encounters that seemed certain to be fatal that he began to believe he could handle anything the natural world threw at him. His television crew had watched him take increasingly dangerous risks. They'd seen him approach creatures that other wildlife experts wouldn't go near. They'd filmed him in situations that made experienced cameramen nervous. But Steve always seemed to know exactly how far he could push before crossing the line into genuine danger. He had an almost supernatural ability to read animal behavior, to sense when a situation was about to turn deadly, and to extract himself before things went wrong. But overconfidence is nature's favorite trap. In the weeks leading up to September 4th, Steve had been working on multiple projects simultaneously. He was filming content for Ocean's Deadliest, a documentary series that would showcase some of the most dangerous marine creatures on Earth. He was also gathering footage for Bindi's new children's show, wanting to create content that would inspire the next generation of conservationists. The schedule was demanding. The diving conditions were challenging, and Steve was pushing himself harder than usual to capture the perfect shots. September 4th, 2006, began like any other filming day. The crew assembled early morning at Port Douglas, preparing for what should have been a routine diving expedition to Bat Reef. The weather was perfect, the water conditions were ideal, and Steve was in excellent spirits. He talked excitedly about the footage they hoped to capture, the creatures they might encounter, and the educational value of the content they were creating. Cameraman Justin Lyons had worked with Steve for years, and he'd never seen him more enthusiastic about a project. The plan was straightforward. They would search for tiger sharks, one of the ocean's most magnificent predators, and capture footage that would demonstrate both their power and their importance to marine ecosystems. Steve wanted to show viewers that even these apex predators deserved protection and respect. He wanted to swim alongside them, to showcase their grace and beauty, and to dispel the fear and hatred that surrounded these misunderstood creatures. But the ocean had different plans. As they searched the crystal-clear waters of Bat Reef, scanning for the distinctive silhouette of a tiger shark, they encountered something unexpected. Lying motionless on the sandy bottom, partially buried and perfectly camouflaged, was a massive stingray. Even for experienced marine wildlife experts, this was an impressive specimen. At approximately 8 feet in width, this was one of the largest rays they'd ever encountered in these waters. For most people, discovering a creature of this size would be cause for caution, perhaps even retreat. But for Steve Irwin, this was an opportunity. Here was a chance to showcase one of the ocean's most misunderstood creatures, to demonstrate that despite their fearsome reputation, stingrays were gentle giants that posed little threat to humans when treated with proper respect. This footage could educate millions of viewers about these magnificent creatures. The decision to approach was made in seconds, but those seconds would determine everything that followed. Steve signaled to Justin Lyons to begin filming. The plan was simple and seemingly safe. Steve would swim quietly behind the ray, maintaining a respectful distance, while Lyons captured footage of this magnificent creature in its natural habitat. They expected the ray to detect their presence and swim away gracefully, providing beautiful footage of one of the ocean's most elegant swimmers. But as Steve positioned himself above the massive ray, his shadow fell across the creature's back. In that instant, millions of years of evolutionary programming kicked in. The ray's primitive brain registered the shadow above as a potential threat, possibly the silhouette of a tiger shark, its primary predator. What happened next occurred faster than human reflexes could respond. The docile creature that had been resting peacefully on the ocean floor transformed into 8 feet of panicked muscle and razor-sharp weaponry. The attack began at exactly 2:26 p.m. The ray propped on its front, lifting its massive body and positioning its tail for maximum striking power. What followed was not a single defensive strike, but a frenzied assault that Justin Lyons would later describe as hundreds of strikes delivered in a matter of seconds. The ray's tail moved with incredible speed and precision, each strike driving the serrated barb deeper into Steve's chest. The barb sliced through Steve's wetsuit like it wasn't even there. The retrograde serrations that made the barb so effective against predators now worked against Steve, creating wounds that tore and expanded with each strike. Blood began pouring from multiple puncture wounds across his chest, turning the crystal-clear water around him a horrifying shade of red. But the ray wasn't finished. Driven by panic and millions of years of survival instinct, it continued its assault, each strike more devastating than the last. Then came the fatal blow. One strike found its mark with surgical precision. the barb penetrating Steve's chest and puncturing his heart. The wound was approximately 2 inches wide, creating massive trauma to the organ that had powered his incredible adventures for 44 years. The barb also punctured his lungs, making it immediately difficult for him to breathe. Blood and fluid began filling his chest cavity, creating internal pressure that made every breath a struggle. In those first moments after the attack, Steve didn't realize how badly he was injured. He stood up in the chest-deep water, his face contorting in pain, and screamed the words that would haunt Justin Lyons forever. "It's punctured my lung." Steve's vast experience with wildlife injuries led him to believe he was dealing with a serious but survivable wound. He'd suffered punctured organs before and had always recovered. But this time was different. This time, the damage was far more extensive than he realized. As the crew rushed to get him back to the boat, Steve was fighting for every breath. The punctured lung was filling with blood, making it increasingly difficult to get oxygen. The heart wound was causing massive internal bleeding, and his blood pressure was dropping rapidly. But even in his deteriorating condition, Steve tried to remain calm, tried to reassure his crew that everything would be okay. This was the man who had faced down crocodiles and venomous snakes, and he was determined to face this challenge with the same courage. Justin Lyons was telling him to hang on, to think of his children, to keep fighting. But Steve, with his intimate knowledge of traumatic injuries from years of wildlife encounters, was beginning to understand the severity of his condition. As they struggled to get him onto the boat, as his breathing became more labored and the blood loss became more apparent, Steve looked up at his longtime friend and cameraman with remarkable calm. "I'm dying," he said quietly. These were the last words Steve Irwin would ever speak. There was no panic in his voice, no hysteria or denial. Just the calm acceptance of a man who had spent his life understanding the brutal realities of nature. He knew that sometimes, even the most experienced experts couldn't overcome the raw power of the wild. He knew that this time, the odds had finally caught up with him. The next hour would be a desperate race against time. The crew immediately began CPR while rushing toward Low Island, the nearest point where they could meet medical help. Justin Lyons, despite his emotional devastation, performed continuous chest compressions, trying to keep Steve's heart beating, trying to maintain circulation to his vital organs. The boat raced across the waters of the Great Barrier Reef at maximum speed, every second crucial, every moment potentially the difference between life and death. But the damage was too extensive. The heart wound was causing catastrophic blood loss that no amount of CPR could overcome. Steve's body was shutting down from massive trauma, his organs failing from lack of oxygen and blood loss. When they finally reached medical personnel, when professional paramedics took over the resuscitation efforts, it was already too late. Medical staff pronounced Steve Irwin dead within 10 seconds of examination. The cause of death was listed as massive blood loss due to heart trauma. The man who had survived thousands of encounters with the world's most dangerous creatures had been killed by one of the ocean's most gentle residents. It was, as marine biologists would later describe, a freak accident of the highest order. The kind of tragedy that occurs when split-second timing, animal instinct, and pure chance align in the worst possible way. The footage of Steve's final moments exists, but it will never be seen. Following Steve's standing orders that everything during filming should be recorded, the cameras captured the entire incident. The attack, the desperate rescue attempts, Steve's final words, everything was documented in horrifying detail. But Justin Lyons has stated firmly that the footage will never be released. Never, he says. Out of respect for his family, I would say never. Terry Irwin later confirmed that the footage has been destroyed, ensuring that Steve's final moments will remain private. The world's reaction to Steve Irwin's death was unprecedented. News of his passing spread around the globe within hours, generating an outpouring of grief that surprised even his closest friends and family. His memorial service was watched by over 300 million people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed memorial services in television history. World leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people from every continent shared stories of how Steve had influenced their understanding of wildlife and conservation. But the tragedy also had an unfortunate consequence. In the days following Steve's death, Several stingrays were found dead along Australian beaches, apparently killed in revenge attacks by people who blamed the species for his death. This was exactly the opposite of what Steve would have wanted. His family and the Australia Zoo conservation team immediately issued statements condemning these acts of violence, reminding people that Steve had died doing what he loved, and that he would never want his death to result in harm to the creatures he had dedicated his life to protecting. The irony was not lost on those who knew him best. Steve Irwin, who had survived encounters with saltwater crocodiles, venomous snakes, and countless other predators, had been killed by a creature that most marine biologists consider among the ocean's most gentle residents. It was a reminder that in nature, there are no guarantees. No matter how experienced or knowledgeable you might be, the wild remains wild, unpredictable, and potentially deadly, even for those who understand it best. Today, more than 15 years after his death, Steve Irwin's legacy continues to inspire conservation efforts around the world. His children, Bindi and Robert, have followed in his footsteps, becoming passionate advocates for wildlife protection and education. Australia Zoo continues to rescue and rehabilitate thousands of animals each year. The Steve Irwin Wildlife Reserve protects over 330,000 acres of critical habitat in Queensland. His television programs continue to educate new generations about the importance of wildlife conservation. But perhaps the most important lesson from Steve Irwin's final day is this: nature demands respect, not just love. Steve's death wasn't the result of recklessness or ignorance. It was the tragic outcome of a series of circumstances that could not have been predicted or prevented. The shadow that triggered the stingray's defensive response, the precise angle of the barb that found his heart, the timing that prevented immediate medical intervention. These were factors beyond human control. In the end, Steve Irwin died as he lived, in the embrace of the wild world he loved so deeply. He spent his final moments not in fear or anger, but in calm acceptance of nature's power. His last words were not a cry for help, but a simple acknowledgement of reality. Even facing death, he remained the educator, showing those around him how to face the ultimate challenge with dignity and courage. The waters of Bat Reef remain as beautiful and dangerous as they were on September 4th, 2006. Stingrays continue to glide gracefully across the sandy bottom, gentle giants armed with weapons they hope never to use. And somewhere in those crystal-clear waters, the memory of Steve Irwin lives on, not as a cautionary tale about the dangers of wildlife, but as a reminder that some passions are worth any risk, and that the greatest adventures often come with the highest stakes. The crocodile hunter's final hunt had ended, but his mission continues in every person who chooses to protect rather than destroy, to understand rather than fear, to love the wild world despite its capacity to break our hearts.